Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alex Colvin, and I'm the Exhibits, Publications, and Programs Coordinator here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. And I'm excited to welcome you to today's Research Rundown. Before we begin, I just have two quick announcements. The first is I'd like to invite you all to join us on Thursday, March 20th at noon in the Farley Auditorium for our next Food for Thought lecture, as Dr. Ed Bridges will discuss Lafayette, the nation's guest. As we commemorate the bicentennial of the Marquis de Lafayette's tour through the nation, and specifically Alabama, the Archives plans to host a panel on Thursday, April 3rd from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. Look to our social media and website for more details. Now, without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome our museum collections curator, Jenna Abbott, to the stage. Welcome, Jenna.
Hello. Thank you, Alex. So like Alex mentioned, next month marks the 200th anniversary of a famous visit from the Marquis de Lafayette to Montgomery as he was touring through America. I know a lot of folks are really excited about that one. But last month, we also had an anniversary for another famous French tour, and it's that of the Merci train. So today, I wanted to share with you a fascinating, if little remembered story about two trains, two countries, and the magic that can happen when people come together for a good cause. So my research into the Merci train started when we had an inquiry about a wedding dress that's in our collection. In our non-archaeological museum collections, we have almost 250,000 objects, which is really exciting because it gives me a chance to learn something new every day. This was one of those stories where we really didn't have the full picture, just a small piece of the object's full history. So I went on the hunt to learn as much as I could about the history of the Merci train dress and what a story it ended up being. Um, so I said we're going to talk about some trains. So let me set the stage for you a little bit, and then we'll get right to it. After the Second World War, much of Europe was in dire straits. Millions of citizens had lost their lives, and cities large and small lay in ruins. Economies had been crushed, and they were struggling to rebuild after the war. Increasingly harsh weather at the time also meant that many countries, including a devastated France, simply could not produce enough food to keep their citizens fed, even with increased rationing. It really seemed like a hopeless situation. At the same time, Soviet Russia was expanding through Eastern Europe, and that potential spread of communism through war ravaged Western Europe was an increasing concern for the American government and its democratic allies. Under President Truman, Secretary of State George Marshall came up with a plan to try to get Europe back on its feet and stymie the spread of Soviet influence. The Marshall Plan was a multi-pronged approach to building and reinvigorating European economies, with one of those prongs being the creation of the Citizens Food Committee. Under Chairman Charles Luckman, who you see in the image with the poster, the committee was tasked with finding ways to encourage Americans to save food, things like going meatless on Tuesdays or not bringing bread or not getting bread at restaurants. By reducing how much food the U.S. consumed, more resources could be made available to send to Europe. However, the process was really slow going. In early October of 1947, newspaper columnist Drew Pearson penned an editorial letter to Luckman in his syndicated call of the Washington Merry-Go-Round. And at one point, that column had more readers and ran in more newspapers than just about any other. Pearson had previously been more of an investigative journalist, but after co-authoring a book, which was also titled The Washington Merry-Go-Round, his career trajectory changed drastically. The book was more political gossip than anything, and it hurt his prospect as a serious journalist. So his column, however, proved to be an even bigger hit than his previous journalistic endeavors. In his letter to Luckman, Pearson decried the lack of fanfare that came from the shipments of food that the U.S. had so far sent to France, where the meager by comparison offerings sent by Soviet Russia came with parades and marching bands. Pearson was concerned that the people of France were unaware that America was sending so much aid, and, like many in Washington, worried about the optics behind all the pomp and circumstance that came with the Soviet offerings. He pitched the idea of a friendship train. People in the US could directly donate food supplies like flour, sugar, and evaporated milk to the people of France. The idea was to publicize it heavily and to make sure that the French people knew, as Pearson put it, that this food came not from the United States government as part of its foreign policy, but was scrapped together from every from every dinner table in America, a sacrifice from the American people to their less fortunate fellow men. People loved it. The newspaper editors throughout the US pitched in, running articles about Pearson's idea, and various other civic organizations jumped at the chance to provide support. Within a month, the train was rolling out of Los Angeles with a small number of cars that would rapidly grow as it rolled through the heart of America. A route was proposed that hit several major cities through the West, Midwest, and Eastern US. And after a star studded send off from a panoply of Hollywood's best, the Friendship Train was officially rolling. People in California were excited to see the train off, and that enthusiasm followed it for the rest of its journey. The hope was to collect about 80 carloads of food and supplies over its 11-day trek, but that number was hugely surpassed. While Pearson and those most closely assisting him with the planning of the train's movements anticipated that the American public would be ready to help, they really underestimated just how willing millions of Americans were to give. You may also note that there were no stops in the South. This was largely because of the types of supplies most wanted for stable shipment, like grains, were mostly found in America's heartland. As it went, the train rapidly picked up supplies and eventually had to be split up in order to haul everything to its final stop in New York City. Pearson wrote about the train near daily, noting constantly that there was no official of the United States government aboard. It was by and from the American people. He spoke frequently of American generosity, of the willingness of everyone from housewives to farmers to railmen in contributing to helping the people of France. He also masterfully included quotations that cut straight to the heart of the matter, while also tugging at the heartstrings of Americans wanting to help those in need, such as from an American veteran saying, "I was in both wars, and I know what hunger means." I should also note that Pearson was not afraid of a little embellishment. Many of his columns feature numbers that have been inflated for effect, sensationalization being more dramatic and moving, of course. In many local papers, editors fielded questions about how Americans could help and how close the train would come to their cities. In many cases, there were more donations offered that can realistically be handled by the local organizations. In Alabama, however, since there was no planned stop for the train, newspapers called for Alabamians to send financial contributions instead. In Birmingham, Richard O. Morris of the Birmingham Junior Chamber of Commerce said that cash given to the JCs would be forwarded on to Drew Pearson in order to buy food in markets closer to New York. Hold on, I'm going to have to clap to turn my light back on. Sorry. Over 11 days, the train traveled the breadth of the US as it picked up donations from the American people. When it left Los Angeles, it had only a handful of cars, and by the time it reached New York, it had over 200 and was reported to be 2 miles long. New York City Mayor William O'Dwyer called it a train filled with hope and said that it operated on heart power. After being shipped across the Atlantic, the train spent another 11 days traveling through France, delivering boxcars of food across the country. It also made a slightly smaller delivery of supplies to Italy. But Pearson's point was made. The French people saw the sacrifice and generosity of their friends, the Americans, in a time when they most sorely needed it. They saw, as the editorial staff of the Mobile Journal put it, that the American way was to be free-handed, and that spirit animated the friendship train right into the countries that needed the help, giving those necessities to those ordinary people who needed them without a lot of red tape and formal palaver. So in 1949, France responded to the friendship train with a train of their own. This gratitude train was initiated by André Picard, a World War II veteran who worked for the French National Railways. He said that he wanted to find a way to show the sincere thanks of the French people to their friends, the Americans. The creation of Le Train de la Reconnaissance Française, or the Train of French Recognition, was executed in much the same way as the friendship train. Millions of French citizens from all walks of life donated items that, while not always valuable, carried great personal meaning for those making the donations. A letter from French veteran Louis Brunel captures the spirit of that moment, saying that in the dawn of 1949, I see in this gesture of friendship more than an omen, more than a message. I see in it the pledge that men can love and understand each other when they silence their self-interest and only listen to their heart. 49 boxcars were loaded up, one for each state, with the final car meant to be split between the District of Columbia and Hawaii, who had contributed a gift even without statehood. Unlike the friendship train, the Merci train was not filled with food, but with more than 50,000 objects that included paintings, gowns, and beloved dolls gifted by even the poorest of children. The cars were loaded onto the ship in La Havre and set sail. The train arrived in New York on the SS Magellan in February, and from there, a journey was planned to take portions of the train through every state in the US. Much like with the friendship train, the idea was for it to travel along a route that allowed as many people as possible to see it, carrying the message in words or in spirit, Merci, America. As the train traveled, it would leave behind a boxcar in every state capital. In New York, in the picture here, large crowds greeted the Merci train and a delegation of French politicians and diplomats, including both the French president and vice president, as well as several guest speakers. While the American people had not sent off the friendship train expecting anything in return, they were largely delighted to see that the French people sent back their thanks and turned up along every stop of the journey to get a peek inside the cars. Aside from the contents of the cars, one notable difference between the two trains was as simple as billing. When newspapers ran articles about the friendship train, the name was immediately recognizable, but the French train had a bevy of names to keep up with. Depending on the paper, it could be called the Merci train, the Gratitude train, the Thank You train, and that, of course, leaves out the very different name bestowed upon it by the French. While it may have had little impact in the moment, as distance grew from the train's arrival, this variety of naming conventions could certainly cause some trouble in recalling the full story. And more selfishly, of course, it makes research just a little bit more difficult. As you may notice through this presentation, I refer to it as the Merci train because it sort of seems to me like the best of both worlds. Alabama's car arrived in Montgomery on February 11th. Its first stop was the Union Depot, and from there it was loaded onto a trailer and paraded through downtown and up Dexter Avenue to the Capitol. A delegation of representatives from France participated in the parade, including head of the French delegation, Michel Junot, who's seen here, and the French consul, Lionel Vasse. And this is actually have a little bit of video in color from 1949 of the train heading to the Capitol. My audio may be a little odd here, but anyway, you can see it as it was as it's coming up Dexter Avenue. Cars traveling to other southern states pass through several major cities in Alabama, with hundreds to thousands of people turning up to get a good look at them. Some cities had their own events and guest speakers, such as in Anniston, where Madame Marie Geoffroy, who had been imprisoned and tortured by Nazis during the war, spoke about her experiences. These large crowds and events made sense. The South missed out on seeing the American train in person and were only able to track it through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and occasionally newsreels. When the French came through in person, it was a rare sight to behold. These parades continued on across the US through February, following the progress of the remaining cars of the Merci train. In some states, the celebrations continued on for even longer, with school programs that toured around objects related to the train. And then beyond that, American and French children continued to write to each other and continued to build a stronger relationship with the people of America's oldest ally. So the video that you saw, we actually have the full version of that online in our digital collections, and it runs about 7 minutes. It's part of our larger film collection that features all sorts of videos and short films that are taken all over the state. And our digital asset section uncovered this film last year as part of an ongoing digitization effort that we're doing. They sent it on to me once they heard about my interest in the trains. And then the image you see here, this is our boxcar as it comes to rest on the in front of the steps up to the Capitol at the end of Dexter Avenue. The speakers for the day included Michel Junot, W.L. Perry of the American Legion, and Governor Jim Folsom, who promised that we will take these gifts and keep them as a symbol of goodwill from all of France, and we will preserve them for generations to come. After the celebration in front of the Capitol wound down, Alabama's boxcar was moved to the Union Street side of the Alabama Department of Archives and History for viewing. It was later given to Montgomery's American Legion Post Number 2, where it was planned to find a permanent placement on the grounds of their home at Madison Avenue. Folsom, Junot, and Vasse also made a stop to Oakwood Cemetery Annex, where they presented wreaths at the graves of French pilots that died while training in Alabama during World War II. Contents of the train also came to rest, if only briefly, at the ADAH. In the 1940s, one of our galleries was known as the Music Room, and it was located on our 3rd floor. It was in that gallery that the Merci train gifts were displayed for around a month. Marie Bankhead Owen, our then director, noted that thousands of people came through the museum to see these gifts in the time that they were on view, and even asked to extend the length of time they were on display. Governor Folsom, meanwhile, created a committee that was tasked with distributing the gifts throughout the state. A few objects stayed with us here, while the rest were sent off as the committee directed. Governor Folsom and his wife, who was pregnant at that time, accepted gifts of baby clothes that were included in the boxcar. you may be wondering, what remained here in our collections. This antique vase is a Sèvres blue with gilt designs and embellishments. It was provided by the French president, Vicente Auriol. Auriol served as the president from 1947 to 1954, and he chose not to run once his first and only term was up, overwhelmed by the constant stress and constant governmental crises of post-war France. We also have this watercolor, which was done by André Giudicelli of Nice. It depicts a hillside view overlooking the waters of the Mediterranean and the French Riviera. Unfortunately, very little is known about the artist. But if you look at real life photos of the French Riviera, you might notice that Giudicelli's use of color is pretty spot on. So I think he really captures the look and the spirit of the place. We also received a scrapbook from Des Enfants de France aux Enfants des USA, literally from the children of France to the children of the USA. Inside are letters and artworks created by French children, talking about where they lived and what their lives were like. And then the outer spine has a very thematic title, as you can see. So the first letter that's included in the scrapbook is from President Auriol and notes that he feels privileged to be able to share the spontaneous yet kind words of children with President Truman and the children of America. There were several letters from the children, all of which are, of course, in French. We do have a translation for them included, which was done here in Alabama. In a letter from our director's correspondence files, Marie says that there were 4 individuals that volunteered to work on translating the text on several items that were in Alabama's train car. And as you might have been able to tell from my pronunciation so far, my French is pretty terrible. So I'm really appreciative of Marie for translating these for us, or getting these translated for us. This watercolor here includes a museum in Alais-Saint-Rhin in Bourgogne. Museums are, as you may guess, something I'm very passionate about, so it seemed natural to share this particular work with you. If you see the yellow painted building there is titled Musée, and it's a museum that was in operation at that time. So another watercolor features a beautiful scene of a church in Marseille. And I have to say that by and large, all of the artwork included by the children in the scrapbook are really wonderful. So it's quite beautiful to look through. There were also a few records included that include recordings of French children and French choruses singing songs in French. Since 1949, at least one of the records has been slightly damaged, but by working with some of the audiovisual experts we have on staff, we were able to digitize the records so that we could both preserve the voices on them and also make them available to the public. So both the recordings from this record as well as the full video of the Friendship Train coming up Dexter Avenue are available in our digital collections, like I mentioned earlier. If you go to the digital collection section of our website, select audiovisual, and then click on the link for World War II materials, those should be the first 2 things that pop up. So after this, if you get a chance, definitely go by and take a listen. But one of my favorite objects from the train is this beautiful wedding dress. Inside several of the boxcars sent to America were dresses sent from brides in France to brides in America. This dress is an ivory brocaded satin featuring a cowl neck and long tight sleeves. It was designed by Mesdames Charvet and Ladon and was made by Couturier Perrin of Lyon, France. You can also see the veil that came alongside it. And here's just a few closer detail shots of the dress. Newspapers in Alabama ran advertisements for a bride to fit into the dress. Wanted, an Alabama bride-elect, size 14 or less, they said. The dress was on display at the ADAH, and brides-to-be were encouraged to come and view it for themselves. As an aside, a size 14 in 1949 was much smaller than today. For a bit of a visual, the width of the sleeve, the cuff that you can see there, is just under 2 inches wide. So that's only about like 3 of my fingers wide. So if I were to try to wear this dress, which I won't, I wouldn't even be able to get my hand in there. But eventually, a so-called Cinderella girl was chosen by Marie Owen with the Montgomery Advertiser calling Marie Cinderella's fairy godmother. Clara Ann Day, who went by Anne, was the lucky bride chosen. The Zonta Club and the Montgomery Chamber of Commerce sponsored a bridal shower for Anne, and around 60 merchants in the state contributed gifts to her and her husband-to-be, Myron Turner. The Waterman Steamship Company of Mobile also contributed, gifting the couple a voyage across the Atlantic to France. The state legislature had a gift of their own with an appropriation from the state treasury that paid for for their expenses on the trip, dubbing Anne and her husband as goodwill ambassadors from the state. The trip was purported to be the only one of its kind, with no other state sending citizen representatives to give their thanks for France's generosity. In 1990, just ahead of their 41st wedding anniversary, Anne very graciously donated the dress, the veil, and then later the shoes she wore with them to the ADAH. And the shoes, I will note, were all American. They were made by the Daniel Green Shoe Company, who's still in business today. And this dress, like I said, is actually what first got me interested in learning more about both the Friendship and Merci trains. So it's really all thanks to Anne that I get to talk about this with you guys today. And while we do retain a small portion of the approximately 250 gifts given to the state of Alabama, many more were circulated to other institutions. What you see on the screen is an incomplete listing of those institutions, but does include some of the more well-known. As of now, a complete inventory of all the gifts given to Alabama doesn't seem to exist, but I really hope that one day I can identify everything that was on the train and hopefully at least get some images of them to bring it all back together in some small way. A letter from Marie to Richard Morris, who you may remember from earlier was on the Birmingham Junior Chamber of Commerce, was also the chairman of the Friendship Train Committee. And the letter notes that each object had an inventory card placed with it, but that all of the cards were packaged to be shipped with the objects as they were distributed. And she goes on to acknowledge that there was no compiled inventory list that was saved. Of the known artifacts, there was a pretty big variety included. So we had French dolls, pottery, engravings, several paintings, and a 10-foot plaster statue of Jesus that all made the journey here to Alabama. The statue may have made its way to Spring Hill College, but our records show that they refused to pay the delivery fee, which was $18. From this list, you may notice that many of these institutions are located in the same areas. Newspapers noted that it was Birmingham, Decatur, and Mobile that led the state in financial contributions to the Friendship Train. So it seemed that institutions in those areas received a greater concentration of the Merci Train gifts. Probably also didn't hurt that about half of the committee that made the final decision on allocation of gifts were from those cities as well. But you may also be wondering what happened to Alabama's boxcar. Well, happily, it's still with us and it's still able to be viewed by the public. While it's done its fair share of moving around over the years, it now resides in the U.S. Veterans Memorial Museum in Huntsville. Their display includes several artifacts related to World War I, which is fitting considering the former life of the car. And this image was actually taken last year by one of our other curators here. But the boxcar itself is commonly known as a 40 and 8. These were the cars that saw service during the First World War, carrying American troops to the front lines. Leon Person of NBC News noted that the French railway workers who were principally responsible for this gratitude train have repainted and decorated those old boxcars that every American doughboy knew so well. So while we may have forgotten this wonderful story, and many more have never even heard of it, I think of it as something of a story that we can look to so we can see the best of what we as humans can offer each other: help in time of great need and friendship in the face of adversity. So as our journey with these trains winds to a close, I'll leave you with the words of Drew Pearson, without whom this story would not have existed. Perhaps the basic thing to remember about the two trains exchanged between the French and American people is that it is not difficult for people who know each other to live in peace with each other. France has weathered a Napoleon, a great revolution, the crash of many republics, but still the people of France remain our friends because we know each other. The governments which sign treaties come and go, but the people who enforce treaties go on forever. Thank you.
Jenna, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation of something that we we didn't know much about, but also
Mhm.
that now you have this amazing story about not only the dress, but also this kind of larger context. And I absolutely loved it. And I want to have Tim, or
Yeah,
if anyone here has a question that they would like to ask Jenna, we can. I know
yeah,
I have a few
absolutely.
questions for you.
Yeah.
Um, to start off with, I just want to do a kind of like a big, broad one that's kind of
Yeah.
taking it back also to your job.
Mhm.
This was obviously an object in our collection that you found and you wanted to know more about, but I know that you
Mhm.
also get a lot of new objects in that you do research on. What's the first thing that you do when you get an object where you don't necessarily have the information on it? How do you go about researching what it
Mhm.
is and how it was used? This might be something that our viewers would find helpful if they find something in their attic.
Mhm.
What's the first step that you would give them?
Well, fortunately for us, a lot of times with our newer donations, I will have a little bit of a lead from the families. Sometimes family lore doesn't always match quite up with what an object is. So sometimes we have to look at something and go, I think that's a little different than what we were first imagining here. But there's a lot of really great resources available that if you have something and you're just not really sure what it is and you want to learn more about it, you can use those to kind of jumpstart that search for you. Um, One thing I really like to do is sometimes I'll come out with an object. I'll ask my boss, I'll say, Ryan, can you please tell me what this is? Uh, because she's a genius. She knows what everything is. But when she's stumped, I have a few books that I refer to. We have a whole wall next to me here of like reference books. So sometimes it's, you know, a long process of just flipping through and then going, I recognize this. Okay, here we are. And sometimes it's as easy as using a tool like Google Lens
Mhm.
and saying, I think this is, this kind of object, but I'm not totally sure. Um, but some reverse image search results show me some similar objects, and I think I have a comfortable idea of what it is now. But fortunately, we don't start 100% from scratch. But also, if you guys in the audience ever have anything in your own family's collection that you're really not sure about and you just need some help identifying it, you can always feel free to reach out to us here, and it's absolutely free. We'll help you figure it out. I love solving a puzzle. People send us stuff all the time, and I'm like, I have no idea, but I'm so excited to learn today. So it's wonderful.
That's wonderful. I like the
Yeah.
idea of like, like you said, the reverse search, and at least it gives you
Mhm.
maybe some parameters that you can then like go with there to try to look into a book
Mhm.
or online and find more
Yeah.
information.
Mhm.
But I also love the kind of the plug for us too, that like we
Yeah.
we are all people who love
Mhm.
history and love objects and love to figure that out.
Yeah.
We do have a question from our audience, real quick, of what is an American doughboy? Can you explain more what that means?
Yeah, so doughboy is sort of the colloquial name that we referred to American soldiers during the First World War. So when you hear people talk about doughboys, it's the fellows who were going overseas to fight in the war. Alabama, in fact, sent quite a few young men to go over to France and then later into parts of Germany. And we can also thank Alabamians for helping make some of those first early turns in the war, pushing back German lines, including at places like Croix Rouge Farm. So I always love talking about that. I'm like, yes, go Alabama, we did it. So um, yeah, so Doughboys just it's how we would refer to our soldiers from World War One.
Perfect, excellent. I had a question also about
Mhm,
just in this process as you're learning more and more about the dress and the Mercy
mhm.
Train. Was there anything that you found that you found it super surprising that you weren't expecting to learn about, and what was the most surprising thing that you found out?
Um, well, probably that the friendship train was pretty much an entirely anti-communist Russia
Hmm.
propaganda piece. It was sort of pitched in a half serious way, I think, by Drew Pearson, and then people just really loved it, including a lot of big names in Hollywood and Hollywood production. And in fact, uh, the then president of SAG-AFTRA said, "Yeah, our guys can go do whatever you want to promote this, no problem," which is kind of phenomenal to just get a blanket. Okay, if you want to use a member of SAG, go for it. And so before the train starts rolling out of Hollywood, there's really because it leaves Los Angeles, it's got
Mhm.
this huge Hollywood presence of people who are really going out and pitching it and willing to sit in advertisements and things for the train and using their star power to drum up support and interest from the people. Um, and also, anytime I'm looking at a wedding dress, I'm never thinking communism in the back of my mind, but it crept up, so there it was. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah,
Oh
Hollywood and
goodness.
communism.
Hollywood and communism with
Hollywood and
and a
communism
wedding dress, you
and a
know?
wedding dress. Yeah,
That's the making of a movie right there.
it is. It is. Yeah. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about your research into this wonderful artifact, but also kind of letting us know a little bit about the process for how you
mhm.
go about finding more about our amazing collection. So thank you very
Thank
much. And thank you to everyone who
you.
joined us. And I hope to see y'all again next month, the first Monday in April, as we look at a Civil War topic with our reference archivist, Kayla Scott Gerner. Thank y'all.